Welcome to Time of Death. This video is for informational purposes and in no way meant to glorify or condone violence. In today's video, we'll be discussing the murder of Eric Roche Jr. Roche was shot and killed on Thursday, November 19, 2009, in the 6400 block of Rosemead Boulevard in Pico Rivera, according to LA County coroner records. Edward Ortega and Dennis Rivera Flores were subsequently arrested and charged with the murder. The following is the evidence at trial. On the evening of November 19, 2009, Ms. Cleaver and Ms. Adame drove to defendant Flores' house to pick him up. Defendant Flores directed Cleaver to pick up defendant Ortega at his girlfriend's house in Pico Rivera. Ms. Cleaver and Ms. Adame didn't know defendant Ortega. While on the way to pick up defendant Ortega, defendant Flores used Ms. Cleaver's cell phone to make a call. On the way to pick up defendant Ortega, they saw the victim walking. Ms. Adame knew the victim as Drips and that he was in a tagging crew called ATD. Ms. Adame had known the victim for 9 or 10 years and she had no ill will toward him. Defendant Flores asked Ms. Adame where the victim was from, meaning what was his gang affiliation. Ms. Adame responded that the victim was from ATD and that she didn't know if he had gotten into the Pico Nuevo gang. After picking up defendant Ortega, Ms. Cleaver turned onto Rosemead Boulevard with the intention of taking defendants Flores and Ortega back to Flores' home. While traveling, Ms. Adame again saw the victim walking on Rosemead Boulevard, but Ms. Cleaver didn't see him. Defendants Ortega and Flores started to get excited and talk between themselves. Ortega and Flores told Ms. Cleaver to make a U-turn. Cleaver saw that they were pumped up, jumping up and down. Defendant Ortega or Flores told Ms. Cleaver to stop the car on the side of the street and come back in about 10 minutes. Ortega or Flores said, "Let's hit him up." Defendants got out of the car. Ms. Adame looked in the passenger side view mirror and saw the victim a ways back from the car. When the victim saw defendants, he ran away. Defendants chased the victim into an alley. Ms. Adame didn't see a gun in either defendant's possession. Shortly afterward, Ms. Adame heard 2 gunshots. Defendant Flores and Ortega returned to the car. Defendant Flores said they had hit up the victim, who said he wasn't from nowhere. Ms. Cleaver didn't call the police because she didn't see or hear anything and had no idea what had happened. She learned about the murder about a week later. She still didn't report the incident to the police because she was afraid she would be implicated in the crime. When Ms. Cleaver finally spoke to police, she initially said she didn't know anything about the shooting. She lied to them about what happened because she feared for her and her family's safety. After she saw pictures of the victim, she told police everything. A witness who lived near the alley heard 2 men arguing, followed by 2 gunshots and then the sound of people running away. He did not see the shooting. Another witness also heard 2 gunshots. When he looked out his window, he saw 2 young men running away from the alley and entering a compact car. The victim died from gunshot wounds to the head. Bullets recovered from the victim's body were so damaged that they cannot be positively matched to a .22 caliber revolver belonging to defendant Flores. The bullets bore the same rifling characteristics as Flores' gun, and the gun could have been a candidate for having fired the bullets. Detective Stephen Black interviewed defendant Flores on December 10, 2009, and defendant Flores made several audio tape admissions. Defendant Flores admitted he saw defendant Ortega shoot the victim. On that night, Ms. Cleaver and Ms. Adame picked him up in Ms. Cleaver's car after he called Ms. Cleaver seeking a ride. He was armed with a loaded .22 caliber Ruger revolver. As they were driving to pick up defendant Ortega, they saw the victim on the street. Ms. Adame said that the victim was a Peanut from PN. They continued to drive to pick up defendant Ortega. At the residence, defendant Flores telephoned defendant Ortega and said, "There's a Peanut, fool, so hurry up and come out." After defendant Ortega entered Ms. Cleaver's car, defendant Flores told Ortega that they had seen a Peanut and suggested that they go get him. Ortega agreed. Defendant Ortega asked for Flores' gun, and Flores replied, "Nah, are you sure?" Flores said that he didn't want to give his gun to defendant Ortega because Flores was unsure whether the victim was a Peanut. Ortega insisted that the victim was a Peanut, and he demanded to use Flores' gun. When they drove past the alley, defendants told Ms. Cleaver to stop the car. Defendants got out of the car and walked back toward the alley. Ortega told Flores, "I'm not going to shoot him, I'm not going to touch him or beat him up." Flores and Ortega went into the alley. Ortega told Flores to alert him when the victim approached the alley. Flores observed that Ortega had pulled back the gun's firing hammer. When the victim got closer, Flores told Ortega that the victim was coming. Defendant Flores asked the victim where he was from. The victim was facing Flores and Ortega. The victim replied that he was from nowhere. Defendant Ortega called the victim a liar and a Peanut. Flores or Ortega said, "This is Rivera gang, dog." When the victim saw defendant Ortega holding a gun, he turned and ran into the alley. Defendant Flores claimed that he only intended to chase the victim, but Ortega shot him. When the victim fell down, Ortega walked over and fired a second bullet into the victim's head. After the shooting, Flores and Ortega ran back to Miss Cleaver's car and fled. LA County Deputy Sheriff John Clark testified as a gang expert. Deputy Clark explained that Rivera 13 and Pico Nuevo are two rival gangs operating in Pico Rivera. Deputy Clark opined that defendant Flores was a Rivera 13 gang member based on his gang tattoos and his admission to Deputy Clark. Defendant Flores had a tattoo on his upper lip that said "fuck peanuts." Peanuts was a derogatory term for Pico Nuevo. Defendant Flores also had a tattoo on his chin that said Rivera. Deputy Clark opined that defendant Ortega was an associate of Rivera 13. Following a joint jury trial, defendants Ortega and Flores were each convicted of first-degree murder, and the jury found true the gang allegation. The court sentenced Ortega to a prison term of 50 years to life. Flores was sentenced to a prison term of 50 years to life. Eric Roche Jr. was 17 years old at the time of death.